All right, so we're going to go into our final exam. So if you think you know the answer, just shout it out. It's supposed to be all interactive. We're just going to try to tie everything together, all right? So, in the history of the United States, what is the highest marginal tax bracket we've ever had?
95%.
Close. 94%. Okay, last 2 years of World War II with 94%. So if you were making more than a couple $100,000 a year, and what kind of people were making that kind of money? This guy, a certain politician that, or a certain actor that turned politician, was doing that. In fact, he only made 2 movies a year because he made about $100,000 a movie, according to his autobiography. So by May or June, it literally didn't pay him to make any more money in that year. Why? Because the federal government would take 94% of it. Who got the other 6? State of California. So literally he got 0 of any additional work. So why? So that got him involved in politics. What is the highest marginal tax bracket we had during the 1970s? 47? No. Long time ago, we were barely getting involved with it, right? And certainly none of us were there. But the highest marginal bracket during the 1970s was, in fact, 70%. Disco ball notwithstanding. Okay? What's the highest marginal tax bracket we have today? 37. Exactly right. Okay, what's going to happen to that in 2026? No. At present, it is slated to revert back to what it was in 2016. Okay?
Is that true for all tax rates?
Yes. The jury's out on the standard deduction and so forth, but yeah, it's going to roll back to what the rates were in 2016. So the 37% is going to go to 39.6. Does that cause me a lot of heartburn? No, not really. That happens to be what the rates were for the entire decade of the 1990s. Now, if you think back to the 1990s, was that such a bad period of time?
One of the best economic periods in our history.
God, no kidding. If you put $100,000 in the market in 1990 and left it there till 1999, how would you have done?
Very well.
Yeah, your money would have sextupled in 10 years. That would have been over $600,000 at the end of that decade. What's going to happen beyond 2026?
Rates are probably going to go higher.
Yeah, why?
Because the deficit is
Okay. So what's the government going to be spending their money on?
Social Security.
Yeah, interest on the debt, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security. The CARES Act all by itself was $6 trillion. What else? Pensions.
The CARES Act, now what's that again?
That was that COVID economic recovery, whatever stuff, right? So kind of a big deal. Healthcare, a lot of stuff. What are the big ticket items on that list today? Debt, Medicare, Medicaid, and the 2 biggest being Medicare and Social Security. Okay? So let's take a look at Social Security for just a second and evaluate that program, because it's a little bit easier to split up. When was Social Security started? In the 30s, yeah, exactly. 1935, the linchpin of Roosevelt's New Deal. Okay? Now in 1935, how many workers were paying into Social Security via their payroll taxes for each recipient? I hear 2 or 3, 7. Believe it or not, it was actually 42. Yeah, there were 42 workers paying in. Now, how old did you have to be in 1935 to start claiming Social Security?
60,
Good guess, but higher.
65,
65. You had to be 65 to start for a long while. What was the average life expectancy in the United States in 1935?
70,
Good guess, lower.
69,
It's actually 62. So in other words, when this got started, it was a very different program than what we see today. It was a social safety net. Remember, they were just coming out of the Great Depression. It actually started out being called the Old Age Survivors Pension Insurance or something like that. If you look on your pay stub, the OEP, whatever thing, that's this. So once you got onto Social Security in 1935, on average, back then, how long were you going to be collecting those checks? I hear 5 years. Anybody have a different opinion? Want to disagree with Paul? 2 years. 2 years on average. If you made it to 65, on average, 2 more years and you've tipped over dead. Done. Okay? All right, well, let's think what's happened in the intervening time. Social Security went from a social safety net and it morphed into something it was never intended for. It's become our nation's pension plan, for lack of better definition. So if we look over the generations, we've got basically 5 generations that are, working age or older. The first one, which is rapidly disappearing, these were sometimes called the Henry Ford generation, the World War II veterans that Tom Brokaw renamed the greatest generation. And then they were followed by silent generation, they called them. Now, they were mostly, that was the Korean War era, right? And they came back from World War II in Korea and started doing something at a rate that had never been done before. What was that? I hear home purchases. Making babies. Thank you for putting that so delicately. So, making babies, which created, of course, us, the baby boom generation, right? Did we have as many kids as our parents did? Nope, not quite. But the next generation has kind of figured it out. I've got a couple of daughters with 5 kids each. They figured that out. See, kids are not only a tax deduction, but they're also a tax credit, right? Hopefully, right? Okay, so with this demographic, with the baby boomers, let's face it, we have changed things our whole life as we have gone through life, right? Disposable diapers, that was a whole thing that took off. Lee Iacocca made money on us twice, the first time with the Mustang and the second time with the minivan, right? So you saw that coming. Changed all kinds of things along the way. So now let's look at Social Security today, because we don't have as many workers in the workforce coming in behind us. How many workers do we have contributing today for each recipient? I hear 7. 3. Oh, point. Always the optimist, right, Carrie? Way to be. Okay, 3 to 1. Okay, technically it's 2.9, but we'll round it to 3. But 10 years from now, what's it going to be? Because we got baby boomers retiring 10 to 12,000 a day, retiring from the workforce. 10 years from now, that's going to be closer to 2. So we're kind of getting closer to Carrie's number, okay? So how old do you have to be to start drawing Social Security today? 62, okay? And if you go on claim today, on average, how long are you going to be collecting those checks?
16 years.
I hear 16, do I hear more? I hear 20, do I hear more? Okay, 23. Okay, 23. Now, some people have taken issue with that, and they said, Scott, no, life expectancy in the U.S. is around 76, 77. Yes, that's true for the populace at large, but that's including infant mortality, teenage drivers and whatever, et cetera, et cetera. If you make it to 62, there are very strong odds that you'll make it to 85. Okay, very strong. So there's your 23. So what do you think about Social Security? We're kind of in a pickle with that, right? So do y'all remember David Walker? What was his claim to fame?
He said we were going to have to double tax rates.
He did. Yeah, he did. So as the CPA of the USA for 10 years, he had to testify before Congress a couple times a year, each time rebuking them for not getting their fiscal house in order. He says, if you think Social Security is bad, he said, Medicare is 5 times worse. He said, entitlements are a fiscal cancer, 5 times more expensive than Social Security. And in order to keep these promises, tax rates have to double. Well, he started preaching that a long time ago, right? This book, Come Back America, came back in 2009. He says, with no change in tax rates, the national debt's going to grow by $2 trillion a year, just additional interest on the debt, and et cetera, without any new spending, until it hits $53 trillion a year. Why would it stop there? Yeah, at that point, current tax revenues would entirely be consumed by the interest on the debt, at which point we're toast, without some changes. Now, there's really only 2 levers to pull, right? Tax more or spend less. So he went around, as most authors do, and he had this book come out on his tour. So he's doing radio programs, this and that and the other thing. And one of the programs he was on happened to be National Public Radio. And he's in there saying tax rates really have to double in order for us to get out of this mess. And the talk show hostess didn't believe him. He says, I can explain it with one 4-letter word. She couldn't guess it, so they opened the phone lines and they had people calling in. What kind of things do you think they guessed? Debt came up. One guy called in and said, health. Okay. Anyone want to take a stab at it? Math. It's math. So since we're in the fall and, elections usually come around this time of year, one of our colleagues up in Michigan, I think he said he was in Fond du Lac, Michigan or someplace doing the same class. And afterwards, he says, I've never felt so powerful in my life. He says, everyone was coming up afterwards saying, who should we vote for? Right? Yeah, ooh. But, at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. No matter who gets in office, they're inheriting the same math problem. And there's only 2 levers, taxation or spending. So like that little video that I played earlier, we're in the same thing, just different numbers. Raise the debt ceiling, kick the can down the road. We really don't want to talk about raising taxes. That's uncomfortable and likely to get us not elected again. So it's kind of frustrating, not unlike a cartoon that you may have seen when you were younger. Anybody watch The Roadrunner ever? So the Roadrunner's always going around just running and having fun, but then there's who after him? Super genius, right? So Wile E. Coyote chasing him. So there's one particular episode that kind of stands out in context of what we're talking about. So in this episode, Wile E. Coyote is building this, make your own bomb kit that he bought from Acme. And he's assembling it on the workbench inside his shed that he got from Acme. It's all from Acme, right? And he's so intent on the task of building this bomb that he does not notice that the road runners pushed him into the middle of the train tracks until the screws and bolts are vibrating off his workbench, right? And then he looks out the little side window to see the oncoming train. Well, coincidentally, there's a little story we found of one of, you may know him, a neighbor nearby. So this actually made it into USA Today. It says a man from far west Utah, this is back in 2009, was stuck on a railroad track, but he managed to bail out of his car that was stuck before it was struck by a commuter train. Danny Olson, then age 62, took a wrong turn, got his 98 Nissan Sentra stuck between the rails Monday evening. When he saw the lights of an approaching train approaching in his rear view mirror, what do you think he did? Got out, got off the tracks, right? Okay, so saving his life, no doubt. Now in the Roadrunner cartoons, you know, the Wile E. Coyote, super genius, in his shed, he just reaches over and he sees the train, just pulls the blind down on the window, right? As though that was going to do any good. And of course, major explosion. But does he ever really get killed?
No.
God, so frustrating, right? So he walks away, very much the worse for wear, but he walked away, all right? So in the circumstance we find ourselves in our country, most of us are kind of frustrated. And unlike Wile E. Coyote, we don't always get a chance to walk away from it. There's not much we can do individually about it, but we've got a train coming at us, don't we? In the form of what? Higher taxes. Because of debt, in part, for sure. Okay? And so what can we do about it? Well, write your congressman, try to get him to do something. But what do we do about ourselves? If we're like Danny Olson, stuck in our Nissan Sentra in front of the front runner, get off the tracks, right? So in that context, we want to try to get off the tracks. To do that, we have to kind of keep in mind how the IRS sees our stuff. How can we get our stuff off the tracks? So if you're looking at the world from the IRS's perspective, there's three categories or buckets that your accounts are going to fall into. Okay, the taxable bucket, what's in there?
Emergency fund,
No, those are tax deferred.
your emergency fund.
Yeah, your emergency funds. So savings, checking, money market, stocks, bonds, mutual funds, etc. How do we know if we have it? You get a 1099 each year on the earnings, even if you didn't take them out. You have to recognize the earnings in the year they're earned. So great for an emergency fund, but all those earnings are 100% taxable, as I mentioned, in the year that they're earned. But it's very liquid. You don't care whether you pull it out from that account. You're not having to calculate what this is going to do to me next April. Do I have to send in a big check, right? And how much should we have there in a rising tax rate environment? 6 months. Okay, great emergency fund, 6 months. Okay, next category, tax deferred. Okay, Scott, I'm ready for you. What do we got in here? 401k, IRA, what else? KEOs, SEPs, SARSEPs, 403bs, 457s, annuities, all of that kind of stuff. So these have slightly different rules, contribution limits, but same mechanics. You get a deduction for what you put into it in the year you put it in. It grows, tax deferred by definition. But when it comes out, how's it taxed? All of it, right? Not just the gains. All of it comes out as ordinary income, right? So what's wrong with this picture? If we think tax rates are going up, we've heard all our lives what? In retirement, you're going to be in a... Okay, well, let's think that through for a second. While we're working and earning and putting away into this, we've got all kinds of deductions, don't we? I mean, we had, what? Children, not only a deduction, but a credit. Okay, what else? House interest, right? What else? okay? Plus your contributions were deductible as you went along, right? And charity, okay? What do you have when you retire? Do you have any of those deductions? Those deductions may have added up to, you know, $50, $60, $70, $90,000, depending on your circumstance. When you retire, what do you get?
How much?
Yep, still got to pull it to get my standard deduction. That's what you get, right? Okay, so these others have gone away. Now for charity, we find most people that are charitably minded continue to be so in retirement, but the nature of their giving changes. Instead of money, they give their... And what does the IRS think of their time that they're giving? Nothing. That doesn't come up at all. So it doesn't even count. So if you got $120,000 a year coming in income from your tax-deferred accounts, your pensions, your Social Security, this, that, and the other, all you have left is your standard deduction. Now, once you're 65, you get an extra $1,500 apiece. But if you're in the 28% tax bracket, that puts you 22%-ish bracket right there. Maybe you were in the 12 before when you had all the deductions, but now you're in the 22. You just changed brackets even though the brackets haven't changed yet, right? Imagine if they do. All right, so what happens when you turn 73, or if you're born 60 or later, 75? You have to take it out, whether you need it or not. So yep, required minimum distributions. Now, it used to be, if you didn't take that required minimum distribution out, there was an excise tax or a penalty applied that was what? Do you remember? It was 50% of what you should have taken out. Now, truth be told, that was an exorbitantly huge penalty, and most of the time it got waived. People went in and said, oh, I'm so sorry, I didn't realize, I'll do it right now. And they got it forgiven. But in the most recent legislation that was passed this spring, the IRS said, okay, that was a really big penalty and it kind of wasn't really working. So we're going to change it to 25% now instead. Plus, you still have to take it out. Plus, it's still taxable, right? So it still might be half of what you took out goes to penalty and taxes. Now, it also contributes to your provisional income, which says if your income is over $34,000 a year as a single filer or $44,000 a year if you're married filing jointly, then that means 85% of your Social Security gets added into your adjusted gross income. Well, if you do that on top of your other stuff, remember high school chemistry and that graduated cylinder that I tried to draw and wasn't very good at? This is much better. So what it says, whatever income comes in goes to the bottom and is taxed at that rate until you hit that threshold and so forth. Even Bill Gates pays 10% on that little bit. It's a blip, but still. And then the next bracket's 12%, 22, 24, 32, 35, 37. All right, so if you're going along and you have these items coming out to supplement Social Security to support your lifestyle, and that puts you into, say, a 22% bracket, and then suddenly 85% of your Social Security goes in on top of that also, there's another $21,000, that might tip you over into the 24% or more, depending on your circumstance. We find, if that's the case, if you're paying 22% on that for federal taxes, there's almost another $5,000 a year you got to take out to pay the tax bill on the Social Security you're getting. Where does that usually come from? What kind of saving? 401k, yeah. So you take out more that's also taxable. So you got to pay more tax because you pulled it out. It ends up becoming kind of a vicious cycle. The final category we had is tax-free. Now, what kind of things might we find here? We hear that a lot. But remember, to be truly tax-free, it must be free of federal tax, which they are, must be free of state income tax, which they might be depending on what state issued them, right? So if you got a municipal bond from California, say, can't imagine why you would, but if you did, is Utah going to give you a break on the dividends from that bond? No, okay? Capital gains tax, let's say, because most of us aren't going to go get a bond ourselves, we're going to probably use municipal bonds as part of a municipal bond fund, which is going to have municipal bonds from all over. Let's say the fund manager, for whatever reason, to raise cash or something, sold a bond for a capital gain. Is that subject to capital gains tax? Yes, it is. So if we're looking at municipal bonds, we get the credit for federal, but not necessarily state, not cap gains, and the dividends go into your provisional income formula, so they may cause your Social Security to be taxed. So not necessarily really tax-free, are they? So other things that we might find there would be all the Roth accounts, right? So we're going to look at a case study. So here's Mr. and Mrs. Jones. Very happy couple, aren't they? And we're going to talk about them as a scenario to kind of illustrate what we're talking about. So they've got their money in their various buckets. Let's see what they've got. So between taxable, tax deferred, and tax free, they've got an IRA that's currently worth about $500,000. Now they're age 50. If you remember, we talked about an ideal amount in the tax deferred bucket is how much? That's emergency fund, that's taxable. Tax deferred bucket, we want it so that our RMDs are equal to or less than our standard deduction, right? So if we can get it out tax-free, you know, trifecta. Well, that $500,000 is kind of about where we want that balance to be to keep the RMDs manageable. But they're age 50. What's that going to do between now and age 65? Yeah, it's going to really grow. So how do we keep that from growing? Don't say put it in the market. Then they've got some mutual funds worth about $100,000, 401k, no match, kind of a sucky employer. They're putting 10% into there because Dave Ramsey said to. Term life insurance, paying about $2,000 a year for it. They've got a long-term care policy because they had to take care of her mother, and they know kind of what a burden that can be. So I've been around the block a few times. I've been recruited and seen all kinds of different presentations everywhere in my industry. It's kind of disturbing, really. But here's what you would hear if you went into a typical financial advisor's office. They would say, okay, Mr. and Mrs. Jones, you got this $500,000 and you're earning about 7%. Congratulations, you're doing great. They always congratulate you, okay? You're doing well. We think we can get you about 8. We think we ought to just move that over here. We can do a little better for you. Those mutual funds, they're kind of bond funds. Maybe you're doing about 3%. We think get you about 5 and maybe give you some break points just because. The 401k at your employers, you know, you're getting that tax deduction. We can't do anything here that close. So keep doing what you're doing there. That's awesome. When you retire, kind of bring it over. We'll see if we can't get you some more break points and stuff. Term life, long-term care, those are probably good ideas, but not really what we do. So who are we to say one way or the other? But, you know, keep it up. That's awesome. For my part, having been around the block a time or 3, we see some red flags here on each of these lines for several reasons that I'll go over here shortly. So as we're talking about this, for Mr. and Mrs. Jones, they've got this $500,000 IRA, as I was starting to say. 15 years from now, what's that going to be worth? Well, obviously depending on rate of return, right? But let's say it got 8% for sake of argument. That's going to be about $1.6 million. Well, the RMDs on that by themselves are probably going to put them in the highest tax bracket in retirement. Okay? So how do we keep that from growing? What can we do? Roth conversion, okay? Great idea. We could do that. But how old are they? 50? What happens if we pull out to do a Roth conversion?
You have to wait till you're 59 and a half.
Usually.
So they might be able to do a conversion, but it'll be taxable income, right?
Yeah, it is taxable, yeah.
Give that extra 10%.
So there is a way around the penalty. So we want to work on that. There's a rule. It's IRS Code Section 72, subsection T. So being the creative geniuses that we are in the industry, we usually call that a 72T. And what it does is it allows you to shift money from tax deferred to tax free. You do have to pay the taxes on it as you do. But if you just converted it all at once, that's not a very smart way to go about it, is it? Because now you jump up to that higher bracket, and so you just forfeited 40% of that in taxes. That hurts. Don't want to do that. And if you didn't do it right, you have the 10% penalty besides, which sucks. So if we did a 72T, what it says is if you take equal distributions over time, before you're 59 and a half, you do pay tax but no penalty, but the distributions have to last for at least 5 years or until you're 59 and a half, whichever is longer. And so at their age, we would probably do about 5% a year, okay? To see what we can work with.
So you would convert 5% to a Roth?
Uh-huh. Yep, so what we would do is take about $25,000 a year and do that Roth conversion, okay? And on the mutual funds that they've been contributing to, there's $6,000 a year that they didn't know what else to do with, so they're putting it into mutual funds. The 401k, if there's no match, do we really want to keep doing that? There's not any incentive to. Most of them that we see don't necessarily have as many or as good of funding options as you might find somewhere else. So since there's no match, we can work with that money. And the life insurance and the long-term care, what if we could redirect that some way to get more of it into the tax-free bucket? So if we add all that up together, we've got $47,000 a year that we can work with, right? This is a trick question. Okay, ladies, your husband comes home and says, we're going to pay an extra $10,500 a year in taxes. We got to cut back our lifestyle. Is that going to go over very well? It would not at my house. Okay, so we don't really have that much because the IRA rollover is a taxable thing, and the 401k, we're not getting the deduction anymore, so we got to pay more out of our paycheck. So if we take those things into account, really we've got $36,500 that we want to try to shift into that tax-free bucket if we can. So if we're going to start doing that, my favorite tool to use, all things being equal, would be to contribute to a Roth IRA. Okay, so if we're assuming the employer doesn't match, they also don't offer a Roth option. If they did, we'd consider it. So at 50, they can do the catch-up provision, so we've got $15,000 a year that we can put into a Roth IRA. If we leave it alone till we're 59 and a half, everything that we take out of that's going to be tax-free, won't affect our Social Security, off to the races, right? So out of our 36, we've handled 15,000 of it, which leaves 21,500 to get over into the tax-free bucket. How are we going to do that? What if I told you there was a tool that we could use where you can put money in, there's no contribution limit to it, there's no withdrawal age minimum or anything of the sort. We can take money out before age 59 and a half, tax-free and without penalty. There's no 1099s on it as it grows. Tax-free distribution, no limits, no income thresholds we have to live by, and no legislative risk. What do I mean by legislative risk?
Can't change the law.
Yeah, they can't change the rules. So with this, they've changed the rules a few times, but each time that they did, all those that already had this tool were, what's the term? Grandfathered in. Okay, so they're okay. So what's the catch? There's always a catch. Well, the catch with this is you have to pay some fees from this fund in order to pay for some term insurance. But it also brings the benefit with it that it can be used for long-term care. So if the term insurance had a $400,000 death benefit, you could have roughly 1/4 of that a year for long-term care expenses if you needed them. We like to call this falls under Section 7702 of the tax code governing cash value type life insurance products. Our favorite tool here is an indexed universal life policy. We like to call it ALIRP because it's fun to say. It stands for Life Insurance Retirement Plan. So if we want to get to the 0% tax bracket, we really have to use all the tools that are available. So if a person qualified for the death benefit and whatnot, this is kind of fun. Now, what's the perfect tax bracket from our perspective? 0, right? In retirement, if we can be in the 0% tax bracket, that's where we'd like to be. So how did we do for the Joneses? Well, they've been contributing to a Roth IRA. If they're retiring at 65, anything they take out after that is going to be tax-free, right? We have the life insurance retirement plan, same thing. Do it right, it's tax-free. So if we look at their other accounts, we've kept their IRA at $500,000. And so we've done some conversion to the Roth along the way. The standard deduction today is $27,700. The IRS has heretofore been indexing that up for inflation. Assuming they continue to do so, by the time these folks are 65, that's probably going to be somewhere in the $43,000 range.
Does that change with the 2016?
The jury's out. We're really wondering what they're going to do because in 2016, the standard deduction was half of what we saw the next year. And then that has indexed up. So we're not sure. No one has said. But if you have a working crystal ball, let me peek. But we're going to assume, for now, don't know what else to do. It's the best knowledge. That'll stay there. So if what we pull out of the IRA, which is stated at $500,000 because we did Roth conversions, that would be about $39,000. That's likely to be below the projected standard deduction. If it is, we're tax-free, right? So the Roth, no tax. The life insurance, no tax. The IRA, below the standard deduction, no tax. And if all of those have no tax, is your Social Security going to be subject to tax in this case? Nope. So far, so good.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I cashed in on a life insurance policy I had originally. I had it, and then when I got rid of it, and I had to pay tax on the cash value increase,
Yep.
but not the
Yep.
contribution.
Yep. The rules say that you need to keep the policy in force. And if you have money inside the policy, there are two parties in the equation that have money, you and the insurance company. So there are several insurance companies that have net zero loan provisions. Is a loan taxable? And so with these zero interest loan provisions, they have to charge some interest. You want to find a product that will allow you to borrow at a rate that is equal to or less than what your cash value is earning. So if you do that, you haven't surrendered the policy, therefore you've not done a withdrawal, you've got a loan against it. And then at death, it all gets wiped out and continues to be zero, but you have to, it's a commitment.
But if you cash it out early, you have to pay.
But if you're borrowing against it, no issue. Yep, good question. So if we get to the 0% tax bracket and tax rates double, are we okay?
Yeah.
2 times 0 is still 0, right? So we've got ourselves off the train tracks. Now, if you think about it, if we don't do that, what's second place? What's the lowest bracket we have today? 10%. And so if we have 10%, we add state tax to it. This is designed for nationwide, right? The average state income tax is 6. So hence we have the 16. If that doubles, then we're at 32. So second place is a very distant second in that scenario, right? For taxes. So suddenly a third of what you thought was yours in your retirement accounts isn't. So if you looked at the Jones on the trajectory they were on before and they go into retirement, software illustrations taking into account taxes, inflation, etc., shows them running out of money at about age 85. Well, okay, that's average life expectancy. If you tip over dead first, who cares? But if you live to age 90, last 5 years are going to be an adjustment, aren't they? On the other hand, if we make those adjustments we just recommended, not only don't they run out of money until, well, it lasts till they're 100, and then there's about $1.5 million left over for their heirs besides that. That's kind of a big difference between the two, right? So if you, which would you rather have, I guess, right? Duh. Dumb question, but serious. So the questions we usually get at about this time of the presentation: am I too old to do this? We've had some folks that have been in classes that have already they've reached RMD age, right? Well, am I too old? Is it too late? Is there anything we can do about it? Well, the real question to that is, do you think tax rates are going to go up during your lifetime? And if so, what impact will that have on your portfolio? And if you think it's going to go higher, then no, it's not too late. Here's a preview of a movie you can still see on Amazon Prime if you choose.
The truth is, the federal government has lost control of the budget.
Instead of paying for all the new initiatives, whether they're tax cuts, spending increases, all sorts of things that we like, the government's just putting it all on a national credit card. And as a result, our national debt is just going up and up and up. And it's growing faster than the economy, and that's when you know you have a real problem.
Everything is going to be squeezed out of the budget. There won't be anything left.
The road we're on is a perilous one that ultimately leads to the bankrupting of our country.
So we have a crisis on our hands.
All Congress has to do for this whole situation to come to a head is nothing. Because every year that they do nothing makes the problem even more unsolvable.
We don't seem to have the ability to get along and find common ground.
Is the government trying to trick you right now? And the answer is very simply yes.
So why is this being swept under the rug? Why is nobody talking about it? Probably because it's not popular.
So I've actually been traveling around the country for about 4 years now, taking the Power of Zero message to different groups.
When you cut taxes on current generations, you are simultaneously raising them on future generations.
It is all driven by spending. Once we have spent a dollar, we've already decided to tax it. The only question is whether we tax it now or we borrow it now and tax it in the future.
So to make up for the liabilities that we're incurring with all the promises we've made in social insurance programs, we're going to have to increase substantially the tax rate and perhaps even double it.
Now, precisely how high it's going to be, there's a lot of room for debate. But people will have to pay more tax.
People's retirement savings are at risk of future higher taxes.
Well, qualified plans really do two things. They defer the tax and the tax calculation. Now let that run past your brain real slow.
I'm driven by trying to help as many people as I can avoid this disaster that's going to come up in retirement when taxes go up and the market goes down. What are these people going to do if they have haven't planned ahead of time.
So, not just one guy's opinion. All right, so the next question we get, can you be in the 0% tax bracket and still be a good citizen? Well, the fact is we're not evading taxes. We're simply using the tax code and voluntarily paying taxes now rather than risk what they're going to be in the future. Judge Learned Hand, there's a name for you, Learned Hand. Arguably one of the more famous judges not to be appointed to the Supreme Court said, anyone may arrange his affairs so that his taxes shall be as low as possible. He is not bound to choose that pattern which best pays the Treasury. There's not even a patriotic duty to increase one's taxes. Over and over, the courts have said that there's nothing sinister in so arranging affairs as to keep taxes as low as possible. Everyone does it, rich and poor alike, and all do right, for nobody owes any public duty to pay more than the law demands. So we're just saying let's use the rules to our advantage. The next question that we get is, how come I've never heard of this before? Well, part of that is the way financial advice is dispensed in our country is a little bit weird. It's not organized. So your estate planning attorney doesn't look at the whole thing. They're just looking at how it passes to your heirs. Most tax preparers are only looking at how low can we have your tax bill this year. And most of the people in the financial services industry have been told you're not to give tax or legal advice. So you're kind of left to your own devices. There are other things that could be either incompetency or greed. But if you look at a brokerage account, if you figure an advisor is getting a fee for assets under management, let's say it's 1%. If there's $1 million under management, and if you do the conversion, it reduces it by 30% due to the tax, then the advisor is volunteering to get a pay cut on the work for that client in the process. Or they may simply not have the training to go through and do these kinds of things and do them properly. We've seen all kinds of things come through. So, therein kind of lies a conundrum. Are they not telling me because, just because they don't want to lose the fees? Or do they just not know? I mean, either way, not really a good answer. So, something to consider. So, takeaways. Good news. Tax rates are likely to go up in the future. Not necessarily good news, but we've got warning. The only way to insulate yourself is to get off the tracks. Try to get as close to 0% bracket in retirement as possible. And it's really impossible to get there and maintain your lifestyle using just the conventional tools that you hear about all the time. So we need to use all the opportunity we can. Taxes went on sale in January 2018, and we knew the clock was ticking then, that this was going to expire in 26. That's how they got it passed. So that's good news because you've got warning, you've got some time to do something. If you'd like, we'd invite you to schedule a time to meet with us and just go over your circumstances in particular and see if there's money falling through the cracks somewhere that could be avoided and improve your outlook in retirement overall. So give yourselves a round of applause for taking the time to listen to all of this and being proactive and on top of it for yourselves. We wish you nothing but the best of success in your retirement planning. And if we can help you along the way in some way, we would love to have the chance. Thank you. It's really helpful. So that questionnaire, Scott, just as a reminder, that is an excellent tool just for giving your heirs a roadmap as to what assets you do have. If you haven't done your trust or anything, it will help your attorney to put that together. If you're coming in for strategy session, discovery session. We're still debating on what to call it. Lab session, because usually these are done on college campuses. You kind of think of it as a lab. That information is really helpful, because then in a few minutes we can identify, are there some areas that maybe need some attention? And worst case, you come out with a free second opinion. Again, it's not a sales meeting. We're just taking your situation, applying all of what we talked about for 6 hours together almost, and seeing, is there something that needs attention? Give you all the critical facts. Good question. Anyone else? Any other questions while we're together? We got a half hour before they actually kick us out, so I'm willing to stay as long as you want. All right, super. Well, I've enjoyed my time with you. You guys have been great. If you don't mind, fill out that evaluation, turn it into Julie, because she needs to turn it into Sofa so they can see whether you thought I was okay or not. Be honest. If you answered any, the true false thing, if you see more than a couple of truths there, I think a strategy session would be worth your time. Depending on your questions and circumstances, those last for 30 to 90 minutes. And there's no obligation to do anything with that. It's just we're visiting and looking at your stuff. At the conclusion of that, you can decide if there's anything more that you want to do or not. We're good either way. If you do fill out the true false and have a strategy session, we'd love you to bring that with you with the questionnaire. All right, well, I put you all to sleep apparently. So, sorry, we'll make you go home